Class, this is Maynard Scales, your professor for MCM 370 podcast praxis, and we want to continue on with the next lesson. It's important that you watch this in its entirety, and it shouldn't take long, but I want to go over some things. This lecture will help us understand the three phases of audio production, apply classic sender-receiver communications model, and learn how to create a professional podcast pitch deck. So let us begin with the phases of production. The first stage is the pre-production stage. This is the planning the message stage. Here, at this time frame, you'll define a podcast concept and purpose. You'll identify the target audience or the receivers. You'll research your topics and guests. You'll create outlines and rundowns. You'll plan what equipment you'll need in your recording space. All these things are critical. And also in this time frame, if you need to write a script, this is a good time for you to write a script. You want to make certain that when you move into production, we're in a production phase, that you have your notes from pre-production. That would include your script. That would include any other ideas, research, etc. Then you want to make sure that you have a place to record your audio. It should be free of excessive noise. You want to also make sure that you have good testing of your equipment. Does the microphone work? Are you using a computer to record? Are you using your phone? Are you using some other kind of recording device? And as a result, are you making certain that nothing is muted or muffled or what have you? You want to have a quiet recording environment. If at all possible, you should use headphones to monitor sound. And you want to make certain that you are delivering your voice clearly, and you should have a strong vocal clarity, if you will. Now, once you move into post-production, you want to refine your message. You want to be able to edit the message for clarity and pace. You want to remove mistakes and distractions. This is a great time to add your music, your intros and outros. You want to balance your audio levels, and you want to prepare for your final export. Most often, the final export is, for podcast platforms, an MP3 file. Some platforms will take WAV files or AIFF files, and we'll talk about codecs, the different file extensions later. Let's move into one of the most important things, I think, in any communications that exist, which is the classic communications model. This model includes a sender, which that is you as the podcast maker, if you will. The encoding. And the encoding there are a lot of meanings here. The encoding can be how you're actually encoding it digitally, but also the language that you're speaking, whether you're speaking just plain English, are you discussing something that may be in, for instance, the video game space, and therefore you're using language of the gaming community, or some other kind of technical space. For instance, you're discussing coding and computer programming. And so you'll be discussing things like binary and ones and zeros, etc. So you want to make sure that you make it clear to people that you are going to be encoding the message in such a way that we should all understand what it is you're trying to accomplish. The worst thing to ever have happen is that your message is encoded in a language that other people don't understand. That just creates noise, which we'll get to. Then you have a channel, and there's several pieces that can create the channel as well. The channel can be the internet. It could be the podcast platform or someone's cell phone as they receive it there. And then you have decoding. Decoding is again, similar to encoding, is two-part. One part is, does the device that the person is listening to, does it receive MP3 or WAV or AIFF? And decoding also is, does that person understand the language that you're speaking? That's important. Then you also have the receiver. That literally is the person on the other end of the message. And you want to speak to them with their thoughts their needs and their desires in mind. If they don't need your podcast, then you don't have a receiver and you don't have a value position. If they need your podcast but don't understand because the language you're using, then you don't have a receiver. You've lost your value position. If they need it and they understand it, but it's not timely, then we continue to find that we're going to lose our listener. For instance, it doesn't make sense to make a podcast about the upcoming election and release it after the election has already passed, if you're not discussing things in a timely fashion. The next big piece of the communications model really is just the message itself. So you have a sender, you have a message, and you have a receiver. And in there is a channel. And the message is just what you're trying to get across. Imagine the old game of telephone that kids would play, where you would have someone say something to one person in their ear, and you want to get it to go across the room through 15 people. And everybody, tries to repeat what the message was. Well, you are on one end and I'm on the other end, and every person in between is now the channel. The message was something that you said, and if I received the exact same message on my end, there was no noise. The channel was without noise, the encoding was without noise, and the decoding was without noise. However, if the message I receive is different from what you sent, we have to go through that channel and find how did the message become interfered with. And at any point in any part of this, noise can occur. So you want to try to avoid noise. That means use good language, use good microphones, speak clearly, and also make certain that the research and the script is clear and concise as to what you are trying to accomplish. So here's some things that used to occur. In the past, receivers never had an opportunity to provide feedback. For instance, the news would run on your local TV show, and people would have opinions about the news. And the best that they could do is write a letter to the news station. That required it went in the mail. Somebody had to open it. They could make a decision whether or not they were going to respond to it. Okay. In the podcast world, and in today's world in general, we have a bi-directional communications loop. At one point in the past, the communication loop was one way. The communications model was one way. We sent communications to people, and they had a limited ability to respond. But today, in the podcast realm and in other communications realms, it's a loop, meaning that the listeners can provide feedback. They can do so by sending you a message on the podcast or sending you a tweet or a direct message or DM. They can create chats and discussion boards, typically around the podcast, and provide reviews. Now we have to discuss the pitch deck, the podcast pitch deck. And the pitch deck is very simple. It is just a place for you to put down a professional presentation of your idea. We use the pitch deck so that we can gain funding or approval or find partnerships, and that can look like advertisers. And it shows clarity of vision and your planning processes. What you should include is title and tagline. For instance, this is a podcast about teaching class. So it should say, teaching class essentials. Maynard Scales does the 1-2 punch on teaching podcasting. There should be an overview that discusses exactly what it is that you're doing. It doesn't have to be long. 2 or 3 sentences should suffice. Maybe as many as 5 sentences should suffice. If your podcast concept requires you to write 3 paragraphs, then you don't have a refined idea. You should have a target audience. For instance, I am a Apple computer fan. And so I would make my audience the people who are interested in using Apple computers. And so maybe my podcast may very well be about the latest and greatest tech coming out of Apple computers and how the Apple computer device can be helpful in several different functions. That will be my overview, and my audience would be obviously, people who fit the demographic of Apple computer users. The format and structure. So this can be interpreted a handful of ways, but I want to do this very simply. The format. Is this podcast a serial podcast, meaning one builds on the other? You may have watched or listened to programs where somebody says, well, today we're going to discuss a crime series. And this crime series starts with just meeting the victim and the assailant. And then the second episode in this serial process discusses where they lived. Then the third one discusses how they know each other. The fourth one discusses, and therefore that is a serial project. It means it builds on each other. One builds on the two is built off of one, and three is off of two, and so on and so forth. You can also have a non-episodic podcast where each week we just discuss something different. Also, the format could be differently than in each week. You could have a monthly release time frame, a daily release time schedule, or no time schedule at all. You just like to release whenever you choose to release. And then your structure. What confines are you using to help people understand what to expect when? I always introduce the show, we discuss a main topic, and then we move forward. Or maybe your program doesn't have that kind of structure. We just want to talk gossip and just whatever kind of comes up. That's not as amazing, but okay, a lot of people do that. And maybe you have a structure that has more of a news standpoint. For instance, we have top stories at the beginning where we discuss national news, and then we'll discuss some state news, and then some local news, and at the end we'll do entertainment segment and sports, and we'll close out. What is the structure? What is your blocking, if you will, of the program? And then you should also have a place where you discuss a unique value proposition. And that basically means that people who really like Apple computers spend money and on those computers, as well as other devices that go along with that lifestyle. And I believe that I can find advertisers who want to tap in on that. Also, that the people who are listening to the podcast really will have a preference for my programming. Also, in the pitch deck, you should include a handful of things. The host bio, right? Who am I, and why do I get a chance to talk about these things? It's going to be kind of my resume, if you will. Some sample episode ideas. The distribution strategy. Are we going to use the iTunes model? Are we going to use something along the lines of Spotify, or are we going to use iHeart? Are we going to use all of them? Then what is our goal, and what's the impact we anticipate will occur? And how do we get the right call to action to get people to listen? Some of those things look like promotional ideas. For instance, somewhere between a distribution strategy and a call to action, maybe you're using things like Instagram and Facebook. Maybe you're using YouTube. Maybe you're using text messages to get people to, come to the link and click link in bio, if you will. So here are your key takeaways. Podcasting is a structured communication process. There are phases of production that help shape our message and message quality. And please do not skip the pre-production phase. It's the most important phase. Noise can disrupt the meaning and put us in a position where we have a message that doesn't reach its intended audience in the way that we intended it to be. And if you want to move forward and you want to try to monetize this, you probably want to have a good pitch deck. Pitch decks help turn ideas into opportunities. All right. So the next lesson that we'll put out is going to be on how to use Audacity, how to find it, download it, install it, and use it. And then we're going to get very quickly into recording our first podcast ideas. All right. Thank you very much. Have a great day.